Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. Today, for you all, we have our review of Star Wars Outlaws. Yes, better late than never. We're going to give you our thoughts on the game itself as well as the story. In this video, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. We have lots of Outlaws content already up on the channel. We do have a Let's Play walkthrough that you can check out that's still coming out with more episodes. And then we also just ranked every Star Wars game with Outlaws on that tier list. So if you want to see where we rank Outlaws amongst the rest of Star Wars games, check out our latest tier list. And then you can check out some other lives and stuff we've had regarding Outlaws as well. All right, into the review here for Star Wars Outlaws. Let's start with the gameplay. Sanak, what did you think of Star Wars Outlaws as it pertains to the game itself?
I think it is solid, but it's pretty average. Nothing too special to talk about. Definitely very immersive. I can't deny that. I think that's the positive that anybody, even if they're not too interested in the game, if you get to at least explore each planet for at least an hour, you're going to find that there is a lot to marvel at. I think the original planet of Toshara is a pretty strong starting planet. I really enjoyed that location. I'd love to see that in comics or something else, because that does seem like a nice staging ground for a lot of the criminal underworld. But other planets too, like Kijimi and Tatooine, Akiva from Aftermath, like I really enjoy that. I would say of the planets though, it is Kijimi that is a bit of a disappointment just because you're limited to the city. You can't really explore more than going up vertically. You can't really escape the city. You can't really use your speeder anywhere. And it was one of those locations that just is added to the Rise of Skywalker that I feel like would have really had fun exploring and expanding, especially since it is the home of the Shiga clan. And you start hearing things about their backstory, their species, and everything that I thought would have been really cool to see on the planet. So a little disappointing in that sense. But if you're looking for immersion, great, it's all there. If you're looking for like extraordinary open world elements, it's not really like that. You can't like go into towns and like start fights and all that. You can enjoy Sabak, you can enjoy a lot of mini games. All that stuff is there. You can see people, hear people talk, pick up on their conversations, take hints, all that. Elements like that are there, right? That's for immersion. But if you're looking to have like an almost like the Star Wars The Old Republic level of excitement and fun where you can just start chaos anywhere, that's not really how it happens here. So that is a bit frustrating. It's nice that there is fast travel, and the speeder, once you get upgrades, is pretty good. The combat, though, is pretty limited. I think the takedowns are good when you're not really with somebody who has armor on, but then it is really that same sort of animation style for, frankly, like fighting stormtroopers and stuff like that, which never made sense. I felt like if you use pressure points or use some sort of weapon in those cases that you just have in those takedowns, it would have made it a lot more reasonable. It starts kind of becoming like Indara Verma's character from Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show. So that was a little disappointing, and no real leveling system as a whole, but it was fun. I think it's like a nice beta for like a proper open world game. Like the skeleton is all there. The immersion is all there. But if you've been playing open world games, I don't think this is necessarily something that is anything more than like an average Ubisoft game.
Yeah, and I would piggyback off of that with I play a lot of open world games, and I think in a game like this, you really are looking for about three things. You're looking for immersion, and I think Outlaws checks that box. The environments are very detailed, the characters and the amount of aliens, the people who inhabit the world of Star Wars Outlaws and all of the planets. It's pretty impressive the detail and the lengths they went to. This is a game that I think admires and respects and loves Star Wars to the point where it does embrace the detail, embrace its eras, and embrace its time period. And I really do like that about Star Wars Outlaws. So I think it does check that mark. Where the immersion starts to break is in the gameplay. And that's the second thing you really need to hit here is you need to make it a fun gameplay loop that doesn't necessarily feel like a loop. You want to be rewarded and you want to feel like you're getting rewarded for playing. The objective is to get you to play all of the side missions and everything else that the game has to offer, not just the main story. If it was a main story based game, they could have just made it a third person shooter. And this game, I think, fails in a lot of those aspects. I found replayability pretty dull. I only put in, I would say, about maybe 5 to 7 hours post game. I find the missions repetitive. And while I did have more fun with them during the main story, just kind of doing them in between quests, I found the lack of extra quests, the lack of diverse post game content really disappointing with this game. And it is seemingly saved for the expansive DLC they have coming, which I think is another disappointing element of big studio projects like Ubisoft, where everything is hidden behind paywalls and oh, just spend a little bit extra to get your gold edition and then you can play what should be a post game quest. So we'll see. Time will tell when that comes out. But I do feel like basically when you're done with the game, there's not much left to do. You can do the faction system, which I think this game does an admirable attempt at. It's not fully like a Nemesis system from Middle Earth, but it's a nice start. I like the faction system. You can easily rise and fall, which I think is both good and bad. I found some very frustrating bugs in the way it works, to where if you have a contract and you're not tracking that contract, but you enter an area where the contract takes place in, and then you accidentally leave, not even knowing you're doing that contract, you can instantly fail, which is very frustrating. And I don't know why they would do that. On to the next frustrating part, which is the stealth. The stealth is incredibly frustrating. This game is not billed as a stealth game, but it is a stealth game. You play as a thief. And so while there are story reasons why you should be performing stealth missions, there's not much fun to be had in the stealth missions. Like you said, the takedowns look pretty absurd. I found a lot of times when I did takedowns, the sound didn't match what was going on the screen. It was either a little behind or a little ahead. And so it just looks ridiculous when you have Kay punching a stormtrooper in the face and they get knocked out in one punch. She's got like superhuman strength, apparently, and we're just supposed to accept that. I think Star Wars is a world in of itself that has specific rules, and while it's not ridiculous for people to take down stormtroopers silently who don't have that much combat experience, it is a little ridiculous to just do it with a one punch into the head. Most times they stun or shoot somebody. Why not just give her a stun blaster? It could work a little bit better than that, and you get only one shot with your stun blaster at a time. It takes forever to reload when you do get to use it. So I found combat more frustrating than anything because, like you said, there are bones here for so many different improvements that could have been had, but this game does feel rushed. And while the product there isn't too wonky in terms of its bugs and glitches, even though I did have 3 or 4 game breaking bugs, including a time where I got stuck in a rock and another time where I just couldn't get Nix to jump on an elevator. I had to restart the level. So there are game breaking bugs, but it's not a super buggy game. It's just a game that where you see things and you're like, man, if they would have spent an extra year improving this, it could be so much better. And I think that's where there's a fine line also around what style of game is this, because this is a game that doesn't really pick an identity. It wants to do 10 things instead of doing one thing really well or 2 things really well. And with that, you play as a pirate, a scoundrel, should you be able to go into cities and start blasting stormtroopers or blasting syndicates. I think in a game where you play as a definitive hero, there's a lot of open world games where if you play as a definitive hero, you can't do that, like Horizon or Legend of Zelda. But then you play a GTA where you're more of a mixed moral character, and you can do that. So this is not really picking a lane. It wants Kay to be a scoundrel, but she's also a good enough person to where she can't shoot a rival syndicate who's shooting at her in a city. So there are mixed things around that, and I found that just quite frustrating, to say the least. But it is really the amount of content here that I think is the most disappointing thing for me overall, with the gameplay elements and just the game side of Outlaws. It's a game that lacks depth. It's a game that lacks post game. And unfortunately, to me, that is the hallmark of a great open world game, is a game that I can lose myself into. And even when I finish the story, I can still invest 10, 15, 20 hours into exploring this world, learning more about the characters, and ultimately kind of embracing everything that makes Outlaws a unique Star Wars experience. And I didn't really find that here. But let's talk about those characters and this story, because this does have an interesting story that's different than a lot of Star Wars video games we've seen before. Not too many really tackle the underworld. Bounty Hunters might be the only one about Jango Fett. So there are very few Star Wars games to tackle the underworld, and this goes for a more unique narrative set in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. A lot of conflict going on, as we know from Star Wars comics. What were your thoughts overall, Sonic, on the story of Star Wars Outlaws as well as the characters?
I wouldn't say it's like a crazy advanced or complex story. Like you said, this has been a 1 year gap that has been explored in Legends and has been explored in canon pretty well. I would say canon actually somehow does more than Legends ever did. Legends almost kind of went back to it with Shadows of the Empire, and that was like a definitive multimedia thing. This is not the same thing where everything is connected as well, but we also live decades later where there is more of an emphasis for franchises to be able to push out their story during the periods of time where they can do it in comics, in games, in movies, and shows, everything, right? So this was a game that understood that it could fit into the slots that the comics have kind of left open. And I really did appreciate that if you've been following the comics and you've been seeing all the crossovers with War of the Bounty Hunters, Crimson Reign, and Hidden Empire, this doesn't really try to make any space for that first one, War of the Bounty Hunters, or that last one. It really does try to emphasize, hey, let's stick to Crimson Reign when Crimson Dawn is really out there. It's played a lot of its cards, but now has a couple more cards up their sleeves, and it's just causing and sowing as much chaos as possible with every single syndicate, with the Empire. And that's where a K-Vest can shine, right? So I thought that's where the factions, when you got to play their stories, that's where it was highlighted. It was always great to see Kira in this game because she was always causing some sort of nonsense and chaos. And it was always hinting at stuff like, oh, the auction on the Vermilion from War of the Bounty Hunters, or I got to go meet with this prospective person and, meet with my team back on ship. And you could kind of see where it's trying to fit in this story. And I appreciated that in some ways the story wasn't trying to be self-important or like above it all, right? I think that is sometimes a problem that kind of came with like late LucasArts games where they're trying to make this massive expansive story even if it wasn't necessarily there. This is a story that's like pretty content with just living in the world and understanding you're not the main character. Just enjoy yourself like that. But that doesn't mean that I didn't have issues with the story. I think it does kind of tie in back to the gameplay loop, like you were saying, Liam. I think it starts off right. I think her reasons from Canto Bite, everything going wrong, her naivety and all that. I think the game really does well and gives you good reasons for why you have limited weaponry, why you're sneaking around and all that. I thought it made sense for a good first third of the game. It is really that middle portion that kind of loses me a bit because that is the solo Star Wars angle where even the game's logo is quite literally the same with like the lights and the rusting and everything like the solo logo. You're trying to fully blend into that scoundrel situation where you're trying to put together a team for this heist, for this big mission. And while it was awesome to have like a fully alien cast, like with Ankh and everyone else, right? I loved having all the different underrepresented aliens, especially from the original trilogy, like a Chandrafan and all that. It doesn't really make sense for you to get like fully invested in anything about these characters once you get them, right? Like you can talk to them on the ship and all that, and that's fine. It was very similar in the same way to Fallen Order and Survivor, but they managed to bring in those characters in those cutscenes in those games and give you moments to shine and give that camaraderie that's forming between everybody to continue to grow and be developed. This game does it in moments, especially around the ND5 story, and he is the best supporting character, especially when things start going wrong for him and he's kind of like shutting down and all that. And that's when the story really starts transitioning to its third act, and it is definitely a stronger finish. But that second act is long. You are just picking up people once you know the reason for picking them up because you have to have them for the crew for their certain expertise. There's not much else to it. And it sucks because some of them you do know them from KVS's past. And I was hoping some of the things that they were hinting at and rumors about they would talk about a little bit, but they just don't. And that is a bit frustrating. I thought it would be nice to see a little bit more about Kay instead of just the flashbacks with her mother. I think that also leads me into that third part, right? That's where we finally got that story with ND5 and everything going on at Kiva there. That was a really nice tie in to Aftermath, really nice tie in to the prequel trilogy. But the actual heist with the twist of Zarek Besh, with Slero being ISB, I saw that coming pretty easily. I think it was more that it was his brother with Jaden who was trying to get revenge and kill him. That's where some of the grays of the story kind of shine for me. It just came pretty late. That is the big issue. It came pretty late, and you work so hard to like recruit everybody, and you don't really get to know them that well. And then once you finally have everyone together and all these twists start happening, and then you also get Kay's mother onto the crew, like there should be more juice to that. There should be almost like everyone having some camaraderie, some hesitation. It should almost feel like the Bounty Hunter comics with Taanga and her crew and how they were always kind of together, but half the time they hated each other's guts and stuff like that. And that wasn't really there. And I understand Kay is a much nicer, not really mean spirited character, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Jaden, what he's doing, what Slira is doing, isn't going to have an effect on them, and how controlled and set up this whole mission really is. So that was a little frustrating, but I did like the end. I'd say the only thing that I didn't love about the ending is that it is based on who you have that max reputation with. And I understand that as a game mechanic. I thought that's pretty cool. That's a good way to tie it in and make the efforts and who you selected, who you didn't, make sense. I just figured with this time period, with Crimson Dawn involved, they should still have like a key moment in that finale instead of like, oh, I specifically set up things for Crimson Dawn. It's not there. I think that is where it starts becoming a little bit more like an MMO where you have that full range of your storytelling, who you're with, who you're aligned with. And that's fine. I just think that for a game that does stick pretty well to defined story already, having it be like, oh, this is the Star Destroyer is destroyed because you're saved by this crew that includes the reputation coming in and factoring in, that wasn't necessarily as great as I hoped it could be. Of course, I also did go with Crimson Dawn, so I don't really have that problem. But if you're like someone who went with the Pikes, which nobody did, or you went with the Shiga clan, or you went with the Hut cartel, that's fun for you in terms of a game. I just don't see it necessarily making sense lore wise. But yeah, it's a solid story. It's pretty simplistic, but I also like that it wasn't trying too much.
Yeah, the story is fine to me. I didn't have too many impressions about it. Ultimately, this is a story that comes and goes at the whims of the game, and in a lot of ways plays to the limitations of the game. You only have certain weapons because your mom decided to give them to you, and it's sentimental. It's certain things like that that really don't necessarily add to like the lore around the game. It just is kind of reasons for why you are so limited as a protagonist in this game. You pick up weapons in the game and drop them instantly because you prefer your blast your mom gave you. So it's stuff like that that I found a little contrived, but at times this game does get it going because this is an interesting time period, especially an era for these syndicates to really thrive. And I think if they make an Outlaws 2, if you go post Return of the Jedi, with the vacuum of power, post Job of the Hutt, what could this immediate aftermath of Return of the Jedi look like for the syndicates? I think that's something that could be really interesting. And we could find ourselves right in the middle of it. But ultimately, I felt like this story was a bit scattershot. Things just kind of happen to propel the narrative of the game and to get you from planet to planet. Like you said, there was no real emphasis on development for these side characters. It was just kind of the same repetitive missions of go here, help somebody do this, leave, and that's it. There's no side quests that help you understand these characters a bit better. There's no side quests that make you fall in love with them and make you understand why Kay cares about them at all. They are just kind of pawns for this heist. But then at the end, we're supposed to believe that Kay really cares about each one of them individually, and they're this one big happy family. But I didn't really buy that because I felt like we didn't really spend any time with them. Even Indy 5, who I thought was a great, fun addition and a really cool companion character, you barely ever do any missions with him. And when you do, a lot of it is him just talking to you over the comms, and that's it. And I would have preferred having, since he's such an emotional hook for this game, I would have preferred having a lot of scenes where you actually do missions with him, where you struggle, where he helps you, where you help him, where you start to grow and learn and understand why this character is important to somebody like Kay, who has been kind of a loner her whole life and really only has the one friend she needs, who's Nyx. And that's what we kind of understand about her, and it's still what I understand by the end of the game, but still she has a soft spot for other people who it feels like we just met 5 minutes ago because we're constantly moving on to the next person over and over again. So I found that kind of disappointing. And some other things forced, like her mom, the mom angle, I felt like was kind of just out of nowhere. And some flashbacks are sporadic and not really used in moments that really indicate that there's a larger reason for this story to be here other than explaining why you can do something or why you had this happen in the in game and why it reminds you of your past. So I found that disappointing, but there are some very cool things around the Empire. I liked Zarek Besh and I liked the clans. Ashiga clan, I think, is a cool, really cool faction, and I enjoyed doing missions for them. Even if Kijimi was one of the least interesting planets, I did find them to be fascinating enough to do a lot of their faction quests. Zarek Besh I thought was pretty cool, and the idea of Zarek Besh I think is really neat. Hopefully we explore a bit more of that in the future. There is one really awesome scene with a great cameo that I thought was a very, very cool use of that character. And so ultimately, this is a game full of potential. It's just not necessarily one that delivers on it in its story or its gameplay. All right, Sanak, I'm going to pass it back over to you for your score out of 10. We're going to do 10 for video games now. And your final thoughts here. What did you think overall of Star Wars Outlaws?
It's a fun game. I can't say that I'm not someone who didn't enjoy it. I did. I mean, I also admittedly don't have a lot of experience with open world games, so I'm sure it's going to be much better when I really venture into that sort of genre of video games. But I mean, it's hard to beat the setting of Star Wars. And again, like we were saying, whoever was behind it at Massive, they were like, we want to just get the visuals of living in the world, right? And I will always appreciate that. I think I was a little frustrated by Survivor and moments when, you go to Coruscant and that should be flooded in every corner of the galaxy, especially in the underground and all the different levels that Cal kind of has to hide in. And it's empty, right? So this is a game that was like, this is going to be full. This is going to have real time events like races. You're going to have nice little retro futurism in their games and all that. Sabak is immersive. You felt like you're in the world. I will always appreciate what this game did. And like I said, it has the skeletons of a much better game that can be fleshed out. And maybe it does get fleshed out with the DLC with the Lando one, wild card that's going to come out. And then that one I think is going to come out late 2024. And then the next one would be the A Pirate's Fortune with none other than Hondo Anaka. So you're going to really, really get to explore, hopefully, a lot more sides of these underworld. And I hope that there are references and tie-ins to Hidden Empire and maybe the small gap that there is remaining between episode 5 and the comics of that era and just before episode 6. But I also would appreciate if like you see things happening during the Battle of Endor and afterwards. Maybe this is stuff that we get to pick up on, especially with Kay and her mother and that relationship that the epilogue hints at. Maybe we get to see her and the whole crew together get to have moments and actually grow and develop into these characters with both of these DLCs. Kay gets to become a little bit more mature and all that and justify getting a second game with her story, because I think with experience, she's going to be someone fascinating to watch. Right now, we just kind of got her origin story and it is pretty basic. And yeah, it is the gameplay. It's not incredible. It's not horrible, but it's just okay. And I think that's what's really holding back this game. Because if there were small adjustments made here and there, like you said, if there were just moments where you could have spent maybe a couple or more months just refining some of the features, maybe making skill trees for the weapons, making the ship combat a little bit more refined and less arcadey elements to this game, I think this could have been a much better game. It's not bad. I still really enjoyed it. I generally don't dislike most Star Wars games that you can see on our tier list, but I think for my score, I will give this a very slight 7 out of 10.
For me, this game is about average in almost every way. I found the story, while unique for a Star Wars video game setting, kind of lackluster amongst Star Wars Underworld stories that we've seen before, but the bones are there for a good story. I found the game pretty lackluster as a game, but the bones are there for an interesting game in the future. And I think that's what's difficult about rating Star Wars Outlaws. Not being a jaded Star Wars fan, not being somebody who wants to dislike this game, I did have fun with it. The setting of Star Wars, like you said, is a great place to explore, and being able to hop on a speeder and go to different places for the first time ever in a Star Wars game definitely has its highlights. It has its perks, and I did enjoy that for the most part. But this is a shallow game. There's barely any post game. There's not much variety to missions. There's no skill trees or leveling up. There's nothing to really work for to do side quests. What do you use your money for? Really just upgrading certain small components of your weapon and ship. What do you use those upgrades for? Not really anything. The enemies you fight are basically the same level the entire game. So there's not much to the grinding of this game. There's not much to the leveling. It's not a deep game whatsoever. I think those things really disappointed me amongst anything, because this could have had a mediocre story, but if I was hooked on the gameplay, I would have still put a lot of time into this. So with that said, I'm going to give this game a 6 out of 10. Slightly positive. I liked it. It was fun for the time I played it, but I don't see myself really going back to this ever. And I hope that you have a big improvement for a possible second one. So thank you so much for watching this video. Let us know your thoughts on Star Wars Outlaws down below. Make sure you check out our tier list, like we said in the beginning of this video, and check out a lot of our other great Star Wars Outlaws content, as well as our other Star Wars video game content. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we will see you all next time.